I've been the general manager at Spago Beverly Hills for 14 years, and I've served everyone from presidents to movie stars. In the restaurant industry, you learn to expect the unexpected. But what happened on the evening of June 18, 2004, taught me that sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen when past and present collide in ways that seem impossible. My name is Catherine Morrison, and that night I was overseeing what should have been a routine Friday evening service. We had about 200 guests, including Whitney Houston, who was dining in our private corner section with her management team. She'd requested discretion, which we always provided for our high-profile clients. The evening started normally enough. Whitney arrived at 8:11 p.m., looking radiant despite the stress I knew she'd been under. The tabloids had been brutal that year, and everyone in LA knew she was going through a difficult time personally. But in our restaurant, she could relax, be treated like a person rather than a headline. I assigned one of our newer waiters to her section. His name was Daniel Cruz, and he'd been with us for about 3 months. Daniel was quiet, almost painfully shy, but he was an excellent waiter, attentive without being intrusive, professional, thorough. There was something about him, though, that always seemed a little sad, like he was carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the plates of food he balanced on his arm. I watched from the bar as Daniel approached Whitney's table to take their drink orders. That's when I noticed something odd. Daniel's hands were shaking, not slightly visibly trembling as he held his notepad. This wasn't normal for him. Daniel was always steady, composed, almost mechanical in his precision. But as he stood at Whitney Houston's table, he looked like he might pass out. Whitney noticed too. I saw her look up at him with concern, that natural empathy she was known for. She said something I couldn't hear from across the room, probably asking if he was okay. Daniel nodded quickly, took the order, and practically fled back to the bar area. I intercepted him before he could enter the kitchen. "Daniel, what's wrong? Are you sick?" He was pale, his hands still shaking. "I'm fine, Miss Morrison. I need a minute." "Do you need someone else to take that table?" "No," he said quickly, almost desperately. "No, please. I can do this. I wasn't expecting. I'll be fine." I let him go, but I kept watching. Something was clearly wrong. Over the next 45 minutes, Daniel served Whitney's table with meticulous care, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided making direct eye contact with her, the way his hands still trembled slightly every time he approached. Whitney seemed to notice his nervousness and went out of her way to be kind to him, thanking him warmly, asking gentle questions about the menu, smiling that famous smile that had melted millions of hearts. But if anything, her kindness seemed to make Daniel more anxious. It was around 9:30 p.m. when everything changed. Daniel was clearing Whitney's appetizer plates when one of her managers mentioned something about a trip to Newark they were planning. "God, I haven't been back to Newark in years," Whitney said, her voice carrying clearly in the relatively quiet section. "Not since that crazy night in '94, the night someone saved my life." Daniel dropped the plate he was holding. It shattered on the floor with a crash that made everyone in the section turn to look. But I wasn't looking at the broken plate. I was looking at Daniel's face, which had gone from pale to completely white. "I'm so sorry," Daniel stammered, kneeling to pick up the pieces. "I'm so sorry, Miss Houston. I'll clean this up right away." But Whitney was staring at him now with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Wait," she said slowly. "Newark, 1994. What did you say your name was?" "Daniel," he whispered. "Daniel Cruz." Whitney's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God, Danny? Little Danny Cruz?" The broken plate forgotten, Daniel looked up at her from where he was kneeling on the floor. Tears were streaming down his face. "You remember me? Remember you?" Whitney's voice was thick with emotion. "How could I forget you? You saved my life." The entire section had gone quiet now. Every conversation had stopped. 200 people were suddenly paying attention to this exchange between a superstar and a waiter kneeling on the floor, surrounded by broken china. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew it was important. I signaled the other staff to give them space. "I thought you'd forgotten," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "It's been 10 years. You were so famous, and I was just some kid. I thought maybe you didn't even remember." "Didn't remember?" Whitney stood up from her chair and pulled Daniel to his feet. Danny, you jumped in front of my car. You pushed me out of the way of that drunk driver. You broke your arm saving my life. How could I possibly forget? Now the entire restaurant was watching. Even tables in other sections had noticed something extraordinary was happening. Whitney turned to her managers. Cancel our next reservation. We're not leaving. Then she turned to me. Catherine, can we have some privacy? And can Daniel please sit down with us? Of course, I said immediately. I instructed the staff to move her party to our completely private VIP room and hold all other service. Whatever was happening here was more important than restaurant protocol. Once they were settled in the private room, Whitney insisted that Daniel sit at the table with them, not serve them. I want to hear your story, she said. All of it. What happened after that night? How did you end up here? I stayed in the room, partly because Whitney asked me to, and partly because I needed to hear this story. With Whitney's encouragement, Daniel began to talk. It was June 23, 1994. Daniel began, his voice soft but steady now. I was 15 years old, living in Newark with my mom. We were having a hard time. My dad had left us a few years before, and my mom was working 3 jobs to keep us afloat. That night, I was walking home from my job at a convenience store around midnight. I saw this car park at a red light. A nice car, clearly expensive. And I saw another car coming up fast behind it, swerving all over the road. The driver was obviously drunk. Whitney nodded, remembering I was on my way home from a recording session. I'd stopped at that light and I was looking at some notes, not paying attention to anything else. I could see what was going to happen. Daniel continued. The drunk driver wasn't slowing down. He was going to T-bone your car at full speed. So I ran into the street. I yanked your door open and pulled you out just as his car slammed into yours. You broke your arm when we hit the pavement, Whitney added softly, and you had a concussion. The ambulance took you away, and I tried to find you at the hospital afterward, but with all the chaos and the police reports, I never got your full name. I just knew you as Danny, the kid who saved my life. The hospital bills were massive, Daniel said quietly. My mom couldn't pay them. We didn't have insurance. She tried to sue the drunk driver, but he had nothing. We lost our apartment because she couldn't work enough to pay both rent and my medical bills. Whitney's face crumpled. Oh, Danny, I didn't know. I tried to find you. I wanted to help, to thank you properly, but it was like you'd disappeared. We moved in with my aunt in Chicago, Daniel explained. My mom was so stressed about the money that she just wanted to start over somewhere else. I finished high school there, but I couldn't afford college. I moved to LA 3 years ago, hoping to make something of myself. I've been working restaurant jobs ever since. And you've been here 3 months? Whitney said, looking at me for confirmation. I nodded. He's one of our best waiters. Why didn't you say something? Whitney asked Daniel. When you saw me come in tonight, when you were assigned to my table, why didn't you tell me who you were? Daniel looked down at his hands. Because I was embarrassed. Look at me. I'm 25 years old, serving tables, barely making rent on a studio apartment I share with 2 other people. You're Whitney Houston. You're this incredible star who's achieved everything. I saved your life, and look what I've done with mine. I didn't want you to see me like this. The room was absolutely silent, except for the sound of Whitney crying. Not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs. Danny, she finally said, you saved my life. Do you understand what that means? Everything I've done in the past 10 years, every song I've recorded, every person I've touched, every moment of joy I've experienced, all of it exists because you were brave enough to run into that street. She reached across the table and took his hands. You think you haven't done anything with your life? You gave me mine. That's not nothing. That's everything. But I'm just a waiter, Daniel said, his own tears falling now. There's no jest about it, Whitney said firmly. You're a survivor. You're someone who acts when others freeze. You're someone who saved a stranger's life without thinking about what it might cost you. That 15-year-old boy who ran into the street? He's still in there. He's still a hero. Whitney turned to her managers. Get my lawyer on the phone, now. Then she turned back to Daniel. Those medical bills that ruined your family, how much were they? Daniel shook his head. Miss Houston, I didn't tell you this story to ask for money. I just wanted you to know. How much? Whitney insisted. They were around $47,000, Daniel said quietly. My mom declared bankruptcy. It destroyed her credit. She died 3 years ago from a heart attack. I always thought the stress of those bills contributed to her health problems. Whitney was quiet for a long moment. Danny, I can't bring your mother back. I can't give you those 10 years of struggle. But I can do something now, and I'm going to. What happened over the next hour was Whitney Houston at her most powerful, not singing, not performing, but using her resources and influence to change someone's life. She called her financial advisor and arranged to pay off Daniel's remaining debts, plus an additional sum to cover what his mother had paid over the years. She called her real estate agent about finding Daniel a proper apartment. She called her lawyer about setting up a trust fund to cover his education if he wanted to go to college. But more than that, she just talked to him. For over an hour, Whitney and Daniel sat in that private room, sharing stories, her telling him about her career, her struggles, her life, him telling her about growing up, losing his mother, trying to make it in LA. I kept checking on them, and every time I opened the door, they were either laughing or crying, sometimes both at once. Two people who'd been connected by a single moment of heroism 10 years earlier, finally getting the chance to know each other as human beings. Around 11:00 p.m., Whitney asked me to invite the entire restaurant staff into the private room. By this point, word had spread throughout Spago about what was happening. Everyone knew that something extraordinary was taking place. When the staff and some of the customers who'd witnessed the initial exchange were gathered, Whitney stood up and put her arm around Daniel's shoulders. I want to tell you all a story, she said. 10 years ago, this man, he was just a boy then, saved my life. He saw danger coming, and without thinking about his own safety, he ran toward it. He pulled me out of my car seconds before a drunk driver would have killed me. And in doing so, he broke his arm, gave himself a concussion, and set in motion a series of events that destroyed his family financially. The room was absolutely silent, everyone hanging on every word. For 10 years, I've thought about that night, Whitney continued. I've wondered what happened to the brave kid who saved me. I've felt guilty for not finding him, for not helping him when he needed it most. Tonight, by some miracle, he walked into this restaurant and ended up serving my table, and now I get to do what I should have done 10 years ago. I get to thank him properly. Whitney turned to face Daniel directly. Danny Cruz, you gave me my life. Everything good that's happened to me in the past decade exists because of your courage. I can never repay that fully, but I'm going to try. And more than that, I want you to know that you are seen. You are valued. You are a hero, not because of what you do for a living, but because of who you are. Then Whitney did something that no one expected. She started singing, right there in the private room of Spago, with no microphone, no band, no preparation. She sang, "Greatest Love of All," directly to Daniel. By the time she reached the chorus, everyone in the room was crying. Staff members, customers, managers, everyone. Because we were witnessing something more than a performance. We were witnessing healing. We were witnessing gratitude. We were witnessing two people who'd been separated by circumstance finally finding each other again. When the song ended, the room erupted in applause. Daniel was sobbing openly now, and Whitney was holding him like a mother holds a child, letting him release 10 years of struggle and disappointment and hidden pain. You saved me then, Whitney whispered, loud enough for those of us close by to hear. Now let me help save you. The story of what happened that night at Spago spread quickly through Los Angeles, and then nationally. Whitney did several interviews where she talked about finding Daniel, about the importance of recognizing everyday heroes, about the random chances that change lives. But what most people don't know is what happened after that night. The follow-up story that's even more beautiful than the discovery itself. Whitney didn't just help Daniel financially and then disappear. She became a mentor to him, a friend, almost a family member. She discovered that Daniel had always dreamed of becoming a paramedic. The experience of saving her life had sparked something in him, but he'd never been able to afford the training. Whitney paid for his paramedic certification program. She was there at his graduation, 18 months later, sitting in the front row, crying with pride as he received his certificate. She helped him get a job with a private medical service that worked with celebrities and high-profile events. Daniel went on to become an exceptional paramedic. He saved dozens of lives over the years, including, ironically, another celebrity who had a cardiac event at a private party. Each time he saved someone, he thought about that night in Newark when he was 15, when instinct took over and he ran toward danger instead of away from it. But the relationship between Whitney and Daniel was never one-directional. As Whitney faced her own struggles in later years, Daniel was there for her in ways that went beyond professional medical care. He understood her in a way few others did. They'd both saved each other's lives, after all. They shared a bond that transcended normal friendship. Whitney taught me something important, Daniel told me years later when I interviewed him for this story. She taught me that saving someone's life isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing choice. Every time she encouraged me, believed in me, helped me see my own worth, she was saving my life all over again. For me, that night at Spago changed how I saw my job. I'd spent years thinking my role was to provide excellent service, to make celebrities comfortable, to run an efficient restaurant. But that night taught me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is create space for miracles to happen. Because that's what it was, a miracle. What were the odds that 10 years after saving Whitney Houston's life, Daniel Cruz would end up serving her table at a restaurant in Beverly Hills? What were the odds that she would mention Newark at just the right moment for him to make the connection? What were the odds that broken china would lead to broken silences and healed wounds? The story of Whitney and Daniel reminds us that heroism doesn't always look like we expect it to. Daniel wasn't a firefighter or a soldier or a doctor when he saved Whitney's life. He was a 15-year-old kid walking home from work. And when Whitney found him again, he wasn't in a position of power or success. He was a waiter struggling to make rent. But none of that mattered. Because heroism isn't about your job title or your bank account. It's about the choices you make when it matters most. It's about running toward danger instead of away from it. It's about seeing someone in need and acting, even when there's a cost to yourself. And gratitude, real gratitude, isn't about a quick thank you and moving on. It's about recognizing that when someone changes your life, you have a responsibility to change theirs, if you get the chance. Whitney could have been embarrassed that her waiter was the person who'd saved her life. She could have given him a big tip and a quick thanks and left it at that, but she chose to see Daniel fully, to honor his sacrifice properly, to use her resources to help him the way he'd helped her. That's the real story of that night at Spago. Not just that a waiter had once saved a celebrity's life, but that when they found each other again, they both chose to see the miracle for what it was, a second chance. A chance to say thank you properly. A chance to help someone who'd once helped you. A chance to turn a moment of crisis from 10 years ago into a lifetime of connection and mutual support. Today, Daniel Cruz is a successful paramedic who's saved countless lives. He speaks at events about the importance of emergency response training. He works with at-risk youth, teaching them that they have the power to be heroes regardless of their circumstances. And every year, on June 23rd, Daniel and Whitney would meet for dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but at a simple diner in Newark, New Jersey. The same area where a 15-year-old boy once ran into traffic to save a stranger's life. They'd sit in a booth, eat simple food, and remember that sometimes the most important moments in our lives happen in an instant, but their effects last forever. People always ask me what it felt like to save Whitney Houston's life, Daniel said in his final interview before Whitney passed away. But that's not how I see it. I see it as two people who were meant to cross paths, who were meant to save each other. Because yes, I saved her life that night in Newark, but she saved mine that night at Spago. We're even. The story of Whitney Houston and Daniel Cruz reminds us to pay attention to the people serving us, helping us, existing in the background of our lives. Because you never know who they are, what they've done, what they're capable of. That waiter with the shaking hands might be the person who once saved your life. That quiet worker in the corner might be carrying a story of heroism and sacrifice that would humble you if you took the time to hear it. It reminds us that gratitude has no expiration date. That if you owe someone your life, it's never too late to say thank you properly. And it shows us that the universe has a strange way of bringing people back together when there's unfinished business between them. Most importantly, it teaches us that being a hero doesn't end when the crisis is over. Daniel saved Whitney's life in 1994, But the real heroism was in how he lived his life afterward, working hard, taking care of his mother, never expecting recognition or reward, just trying to survive and do the right thing. And Whitney's heroism wasn't just in her music or her talent. It was in her willingness to see Daniel fully when she found him again, to recognize that his struggle was connected to his heroism, and to use her resources to honor his sacrifice in a meaningful way. That night at Spago, 200 people witnessed something that most of them still talk about years later. They witnessed what it looks like when past and present collide in the most beautiful way possible, when justice is served, not by courts, but by cosmic coincidence. When two people who were meant to be connected finally get the chance to complete the story they started 10 years earlier. If this story moves you, I want to challenge you to think about the people in your life who've helped you, saved you, made a difference for you, and whether you've thanked them properly. Not just with words, but with actions. Not just in the moment, but in a lasting way. And I want to challenge you to see the people who serve you every day. Really see them, because behind every waiter, every cashier, every service worker, there's a story. There's a person who might be a hero you don't know about yet. There's someone who deserves to be seen, recognized, valued for who they are, not just for what they do. Daniel Cruz wasn't just a waiter any more than he was just a kid when he saved Whitney's life. He was a complete human being with a story, with struggles, with hidden heroism, and it took Whitney Houston recognizing him, truly seeing him, for that truth to be revealed to the 200 people in that restaurant that night. Sometimes we're all just waiting to be seen, waiting for someone to recognize the sacrifices we've made, the courage we've shown, the battles we've fought silently. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a moment like Daniel got, when someone sees us fully and says, "I know what you did, I know who you are, and you matter." That's what happened at Spago on June 18th, 2004. And that's why, 14 years later, I still think about that night every time I see a waiter's hands shake as they serve a customer. Because you never know. You just never know who they are and what they've done. And maybe, just maybe, they're a hero who saved someone's life 10 years ago and is still waiting to be recognized for it.